Chapter 165 of Shrimadbhagavatam, Aghasura. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. One day, Krishna was in a mood to have a very good time in the forest. He called all his friends and said, "Look, I will bring my flute and my bugle and trumpet. You can all bring whatever you want. Tomorrow we will have a glorious time in the forest and we will spend the whole day playing different kinds of games." The boys agreed with great pleasure, and there was great excitement in the minds of all of them as they set out ostensibly to graze the calves, but really to have a good time. They left their homes early in the morning. Krishna, with his bugle, led the gang. The calves and the boys followed him. They had little sticks to handle the calves in their hands, and some had flutes and horns and all kinds of material, all meant to produce as much noise as possible. They were all wearing necklaces made of shells and tiny beads, which had been fashioned out of shells, and yet they got more pleasure out of the garlands which they wore for themselves in the forest out of the leaves and flowers of the wild plants and trees. They rubbed their faces with the powder of the pink shell which was there in abundance on the banks of the river. They played pranks on each other and teasing each other and everyone who passed them by. They spent all their time laughing and playing. Krishna was the wildest of them all, surpassing everyone in his ability to think up new games. He would go far in advance of the others and dare them to catch him, and they would chase him all over the place. He would allow himself to be caught, and there would be great clapping of hands and shouting, and the words, "Krishna has been caught," could be heard all over. When they were tired of this game, they thought of imitating the noises made by the inmates of the forest. Some tried to sing like the koil, and some tried to hum like the bees. Some clasped and chased the shadows of the birds flying in the air, and some sat on the river bank like cranes waiting for fish. Some danced like peacocks, and others were hanging from the boughs of the trees imitating the monkeys. The monkeys made faces at them, and the boys vied with each other to return the grimaces. Krishna suddenly jumped into the river to swim, and the whole crowd went swimming with him. How can one gauge the good fortune of the Gopas who had the Lord all for themselves? He, the Paramapurusha, the dust of whose feet is not possible to obtain unless one spends millions of years contemplating on him, with the senses under absolute control, the sight of whose face is very difficult even after many and many janmas of pure living, that same Paramatma, who can be realized only by the knowing ones. He is the servant of his devotees, and he is Krishna who could roll on the sandy banks of the Yamuna with the ignorant and innocent boys of Vrindavan. Fortunate indeed was Vrindavan and the inmates of Vrindavan who knew Krishna so well and who were granted the privilege of living day and night with him. While they were thus engaged in the games which held their attention, all the while an Asura approached them. He was named Agha, a fitting name for the personification of evil. He had been sent by Kamsa to try and destroy Krishna. He was not fortunate enough to know to enjoy the pranks of Krishna which the Devas from the heavens did. They derived greater joys by looking at Krishna than even from a draught of Amrita. This Aga was the brother of Putana and Baka. He was not only eager to obey his lord and master, Kamsa, but he also had his personal grievance against Krishna, who was the cause of the death of the other two. Looking at Rama and Krishna, he licked his chops and said to himself, "So this is the little fellow who is the killer of my brother and my dear sister. In return for that pain he caused me, I will destroy these two brothers and remove the thorn lodged in my mind and in that of my master at the same time. The death of these two boys will be the tarpana for my dear departed kinsfolk. Once these two die, Vrindavana will cease to exist, since their entire life seems to revolve around these children. I must hasten and do the needful." Aghasura went and stayed in the path the children were sure to take. He changed himself into an immense python. It was 8 miles long and huge like a small mountain. His enormous mouth he kept open and waited for the coming of the children. The lower jaw of the python was placed firmly on the ground, and the upper jaw reached the sky. His mouth looked like a huge cavern, and his fangs looked like little peaks on the edge of the cavern. Right in the middle of the cavern could be seen his red tongue, and his breath was hot and burning the air around him. He had so arranged himself that the Gopa boys never for a moment thought that he was anything apart from the scenery around. Some of them even commented, "Look, what a slight stretch of the imagination you can say that this cavern looks like the wide open mouth of an immense snake." They began to elaborate on the comparison. "See," said one, "it definitely looks like a big snake with its mouth wide open, as if it is waiting to swallow us. The roof of the cavern, when lit by the rays of the sun, gives the effect of the jaws of the snake, and the shadow of the roof falling on the ground further enhances the effect. Look at the tiny peaks and rocks at the edge. They look like the fangs of a snake, and this steep pathway, this road, like a crimson bridge across the cavern, does look like the red tongue of the snake. The surrounding area is so dark that it is just like mouth of snake. It is really amazing how even the air around, hot because of the midday sun, feels hot and uncomfortable like the poisonous breath of a snake." One of them said, "Suppose we enter this cavern, will it get transformed into a snake and swallow us? What will happen then?" Another boy said, "Nothing will happen. This Krishna of ours will kill him like that big crane and we will be all right. Let us go in. It will be an adventure." The children began to enter the mouth of the Asura one by one. Krishna knew that it was a python and that it was sure death to enter the mouth of the dread snake. He stood silent and watched and waited till all his playmates with their calves too had entered the huge cave in search of adventure. Krishna was the only one left. The mouth was still open since Aga wanted to wait till Krishna entered his mouth, or else his revenge and his mission would not be achieved. His master's injunctions could not be fulfilled. Krishna knew the fate of all those who had come with him and had entered the mouth of the snake, saying, "If it is a snake, our Krishna will kill it and everything will be all right." Krishna smiled to himself, and knowing that the end of Aga had come, he entered the cavernous mouth of the snake. At the sight of the mouth closing firmly after Krishna entered it, even the Devas who knew the divinity of Krishna shouted in alarm and waited tensely to see what would happen. When he reached the throat of the python, Krishna began to grow bigger and bigger in size. Aghasura tried his best to spit him out and save himself, but it was not possible. Slowly, steadily, life was being choked out of him, and Aghasura could do nothing about it. He lashed his immense tail in agony, but the pain in his throat was getting more and more until it was unbearable. Finally, a huge gust of air, which was his life breath, escaped from his head, which had split under the pressure. As soon as he died, Krishna looked with his eyes full of love on the forms of his companions who had fainted under the power of the poison in the snake. They all rushed out, and when they were all gone, Krishna came out at last. A glow was seen at the mouth of the cavern that was the mouth of the python. The 4 quarters were lit by the brilliance. Even as everyone was looking, the glow entered the feet of Krishna. The Devas who were watching everything rained flowers on Krishna. There was music and dancing in the heavens. Brahma, who was inside his dwelling, heard the music and came out to see what was happening, and when he knew about it, he was amazed at the feet of the young boy. Aga, who had been killed by the touch of Krishna, was rid of all his sins and was granted the privilege of entering the feet of the Lord. Is it any wonder that this happened? If the form of the Lord is lodged firmly in the mind of man, he is sure of salvation. When such is the case, when Aga took the form of a python, Krishna himself entered his mouth, touched with his dear feet, and he had entered into him on his own. Is there any doubt then that moksha awaited Aga, the personification of sin, though he was? Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishna Arpanamasta. Chapter 166 of Shrimadbhagavatam, Brahma's Doubt. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Most of the boys were about 5 years old when this event took place, and they went home and told their mothers and fathers about how Krishna had saved their lives. But they spoke about it only a year later, when they were 6 years old. King Parikshit sat silent for a while, thrilled at the story he had heard. After a moment he said, "My lord, you must clear a doubt for me. You tell me that the children spoke about the great event only 1 year after it happened. How is that possible? Children's excitement is such that even if Krishna had asked them not to talk about it, they would not be able to obey him. How could children, fresh from such an exciting event, wait for a whole year before talking about it? Did Krishna blind them with some oath of secrecy? If not, this is impossible. I do not understand it. Please enlighten me." Shukha Brahma was pleased with Parikshit. When he heard the voice of the king asking him about the strange silence of the children for 1 whole year, it took him some time to answer him. In relating the story of the Lord, he would often lose himself, and he would forget himself as his mind became crowded with the thoughts of Krishna and his Leela. It would take him a while to come back to the earth, as it were. Shuka said, "Your question is very pertinent, and let me tell you how much pleasure you are giving me by asking me to recount to you the story of the Lord. Hear it as often as you can. The story of the Lord is ever new to the hearer and to the one who is fortunate enough to narrate it. Even as the talk about a woman is ever delightful to the ears of a lustful person, the mind of a devotee thrills when the stories of the Lord are related to him. I will now tell you how it happened that a year had to elapse before the cowherds and their wives heard the story of the killing of Aghasura from their children. While they were playing in the forest, running around, the boys with the calves came to the spot where Aghasura was waiting. After the killing of the Asura, Krishna wanted to distract their minds from the wonderment of the killing. He did not want them to attach too much importance to the incident. He tried to make them forget it. Throughout the avatars, and especially in Krishnavatara, the Lord has tried his best to keep up the illusion that he was a human being and not God. But off and on the veil would be rent and the divinity would have to be revealed. With the assistance of his Maya, he managed to make people forget these incidents, and people's memory became quite short. At the moment there would be amazement writ on their faces, but as time passed, the dimness of time would erase the divinity of the person who could work such wonderful miracle. They would just say, "Our Krishna is wonderful," and that was what Krishna wanted. Krishna led the entire host of mischievous boys to the sandy banks of the Yamuna. He said, "Look, friends, we have been so busy playing that we forgot all about our hunger. I am hungry and I am not able to lift my foot to walk even a small distance. Look at the bank of the river. The sand is as clear and white as milk, and it is so soft and lovely. The trees are so shady that we can hardly feel the heat of the noonday sun. The noise made by the bees hooring round the flowers, the rustling of the flying birds, the music made by the running waters, all of them together are making such wonderful music that my mind refuses to move away from here. Let us sit on the sands and have our food. Let the calves eat grass, drink water from the river, and chew the cud slowly while we are eating." There was never a no to the suggestion of Krishna at any time in their lives. "So be it," said the boys, clapping their hands. Aghasura's killing had already receded into the recesses of their mind, and it was the thought of eating that was foremost in their minds now. All of them sat in a rough circle, and Krishna sat in their midst. They began to eat. Each child undid the packet of food which had been prepared for him by his mother. Some were wrapped up in lotus leaves, and some in the bark of a plantain tree. Some were packed in small earthen vessels, and some in stoneware jugs. Each boy was full of spirit, and they all laughed and giggled while they ate, each one teasing the other, making another laugh or laughing at the pranks of another. Krishna, the Paramatma, to whom is offered the havis in every yajna which is performed, to whom is offered everything and in whom is contained everything, that Paramatman had taken the form of a young human boy and was seated in their midst, unpacking his own food packet. Great indeed was the good fortune of those in Gokula who had this Krishna all for themselves for so many years during the best years of his life. Krishna stuck his flute in the tiny fold between his waistband and his yellow silk which he was wearing. He placed the bamboo stick with which he was supposed to drive the calves under his arm. He then sat at the center of the group of boys, and they were all looking at him and laughing at the 1,000 jokes which seemed to be pouring out of his mouth. Everyone wanted Krishna for himself, and so he kept looking at all of them and at each one of them at the same time. In his left hand he held the lovely white curds and rice, and in between his fingers he kept the different pickles. The celestials were ranged in the sky looking on this beautiful sight with envy of the Gopala boys. While they were absorbed in their fun, the calves, which were grazing nearby, left them and went far away from there, deep inside the forest. Suddenly, one of the boys saw what had taken place and shouted, "Where are the calves? Krishna, a terrible thing has happened. The calves have wandered into the forest, and I am sure the wild animals will eat them up. How can we answer the elders?" Other boys joined in the lament, and Krishna said, "Do not worry, any of you. I will go and see how they are faring. Go on, finish your eating. I will bring the calves back." The boys said, "That's right. We do not have anything to worry so long as Krishna is there to take care of us and our worries." Krishna smiled at them and went into the forest. With the left hand holding the rice and curds, Krishna wandered all over the hill and into the caves and along the slopes of Govardhana, and still he could not find the calves. When he found his search for the calves was fruitless, Krishna came back to the banks of the Yamuna where he had left his playmates. He found the place empty, and he looked all round and could not find any of them. He thought for a moment and realized what had happened. When Krishna killed Aghasura, there was great celebration in the heavens, and Brahma, the creator, heard the music and the dancing. He came out of his dwelling to find out what was happening and was amazed at the prowess of the young boy. He decided to test this prowess further. He therefore captured the calves and hid them. He overpowered the boys of Vrindavana with sleep. When Krishna was away and capturing them, he hid them also in the cave with the calves. Krishna smiled to himself and said, "So, this is Brahma's game. I can play a game just as well as he can." The Lord of Lords, the Paramatma who resides in every person in the form of the Jivatma, this universal soul which pervades the entire world of creation, this Narayana decided to let Brahma know that he was Narayana and not just a child which could perform one or two laudable deeds. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishna Arpanamastu. Chapter 167 of Shrimadbhagavatam. The Mass Queried for a Year. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. He was one and he became many. He became the cowherds and he became the calves that were grazing. He became the rope round the neck of the calf, and he became the bamboo stick in the hand of each cowherd. He became the vessels which held their food. He became their torn dress or silken garment, or colored upper cloth or white waistband, as the case might be. He became everything. He assumed not only the form of each boy, but he assumed the nature of each and every one of them. Their different individual qualities and idiosyncrasies. The little army then proceeded towards Vrindavana, When evening drew near, Krishna led the host made up of hundreds of Krishna dressed differently. Each little Gopa entered his house with his calf or calves. The mothers clasped their sons to their breast, and Krishna went to his house to be petted by Yashoda. This masquerade continued the next day and every day thereafter. There were, however, slight change in some things. Like, for instance, the mother cows would rush home and lick their calves with more affection and concern than was usual with them. They were yielding more milk than they used to. The mothers and fathers behaved the same way with their children as before, but there seemed to be a subtle difference. A silken thread of affection, some tenderness, some extra sweetness in the relationship between the parents and children was felt in each and every home. The mothers thought for a moment that their sons were just as sweet and lovable as Krishna was. The feeling was there and they were all aware of it only subconsciously. They did not know it and they did not try to analyze it and seek an explanation for it. And so it went on for a full year. One day, when the year was almost over, when just 4 or 5 days more were left, Krishna and Balarama went into the forest with the entire host of calves and the cowherd boys and all their accessories. While they were grazing the calves at the foot of the hill by name Govardhana, the mother cows, which were on the top of the hill, saw their calves. Forgetting themselves, their hunger and the command of the cowherds that they should not run so, the cows rushed headlong to the spot where their calves grazing and began to feed them their milk, which was overflowing. The cowherds, finding their efforts to be futile, ran down the slopes to collect the cows and take them back. They were bent on scolding them and beating them up if necessary. They reached the foot of the hill and their eyes fell on their sons who were with Krishna and Balarama grazing the calves. When they saw their sons, their hearts were filled to overflowing with love for them and they forgot their anger and tiredness. When they embraced their sons, they forgot all their fatigue. There were tears in the eyes of the older men when they took leave of their sons and dragged themselves away from there with the equally unwilling cows with them. Balarama was standing by and watching this unusual demonstration of love by the cows and by the cowherds in an equally violent manner. He was amazed at it. He stood apart and thought for a while. He felt that even he was drawn towards the cowherd children by a love which he had only for Krishna, and he was really surprised at this. He said, "Can it be the Maya of the Devas or that of men, or that of Asuras? No, it cannot be, since I am also getting involved and no Deva or Asura can influence my mind. This must be an enchantment practiced by Krishna and by no one else." He opened his mind's eye and looked at all the calves and his playmates and found that he saw Krishna everywhere and no one else. He went to Krishna and said, "For a while I thought this was the work of the Devas or the Asuras or by some human being blessed with the power of witchcraft. But I realized that it is you and your power which has brought about this strange course of events. Tell me, Krishna, why this masquerade? What happened to all of them? Where are they? And how long is this game going to be played?" Krishna related to him the background, and even as they were talking, Brahma, the author of the mischief, came to see what was happening. He had, in the meantime, had a humiliating experience. He was still smarting under it. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishna Arpanamast. Chapter 168 of Shrimadbhagavatam, Brahma's Chagrin. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. After hiding the calves and the young boys in a cave, Brahma went back to Satyaloka, his home. The doorkeepers there looked at him and refused to let him enter. Taken aback by their impertinence, Brahma said, "What game is this? I am Brahma and I am trying to enter my house, and both of you who are just my servants refuse me entrance. If it had not been so comical, I would have been angry. The doorkeepers laughed at him and said, "We have never laid our eyes on you before, and we do not want you here. You are dressed up as our master, but we know you are not he, since he is already inside." "Already inside?" shouted Brahma. "I do not believe it." "All right, if you do not believe us, see for yourself," said the laughing servants, and made him take a peep into the council hall. There, in the midst of all the rishis and the devas, he found himself, or someone who was just like himself, sitting on his hallowed seat. Saraswati was playing on the veena, and there was nothing but silence in the hall, which was filled with music. Incensed beyond measure, Brahma walked back and went to Vrindavana to see what was happening there. He saw what Krishna had done. He saw the daily events going on as usual, and he saw the host of boys led by Krishna and Balarama with the calves following them. He rubbed his eyes and told himself, "The boys and calves are sleeping in the cave. How come they are all here with Krishna?" He rushed to the cave to see if they had been found by Krishna and released from there. But no, they were all there sleeping the deep sleep inflicted on them by Brahma. Again and again he tried to solve the mystery, but he could not. He became covered with confusion, with the Maya of the Lord, and he grovelled in the darkness called ignorance. The faint attempt of Brahma at unraveling the mystery is as ineffectual as the light of the glowworm when the sun is shining. Seeing his stupefaction, Krishna took pity on him. At once Brahma saw that each and every calf and boy was dark like the rain cloud, that he was wearing yellow silk. Each one had 4 arms, and in the 4 hands glowed the white conch, the discus, the mace, and the red lotus. Brahma saw the form which the formless one had taken for the benefit of his bhaktas. Brahma stood like he was carved out of stone and stood staring at the myriads of Narayana that were before his eyes. Krishna realized that the time had come when Brahma should be made to realize his arrogance and the lesson which has to follow for anyone smitten with that disease. Brahma saw the forms of Narayana vanish, and the calves and cowherd boys took their places. Realizing the immensity of his impertinence, Brahma fell at the feet of Krishna and begged him to forgive him for his stupid prank which he played, not knowing the real nature of the Lord. He then went round Krishna 3 times, as is the custom when you wish to honor someone greater than yourself, and went back to his Satyaloka, a chastened and a wiser Brahma. Krishna collected the lost calves which Brahma had restored to the forest, and went back to the spot where he had left his dear playmates. They were all there waiting for him. They said, "How quickly you have found the calves, Krishna! We have not eaten even a mouthful of food since you left. So quick is your return. Come, come quickly, let us finish our meal and play again." Krishna smiled his charming smile and finished the rest of the curd and rice which he had still held in his left hand. Krishna plucked all the flowers on the way, and making a garland of them wore it on his lovely neck. He picked up the feather of a peacock and tucked it in his crown of hair. Powdered pink shell he rubbed on his face as a cosmetic, and sounding his flute, he entered Vrindavana followed by his playmates, and they were making music with bugles and trumpets. The children rushed to their homes, and each one told his parents how Krishna saved them from the jaws of death, how Krishna killed the python, and how they all came out of the insides of the dead snake. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishna Arpanamastu.